1984's The Karate Kid went on to eventually serve as the primary catalyst for Cobra Kai's creation in 2018, but it took until the sequel show's final season for the franchise to admit something it had long ignored about the original movie's finale. The characters in Cobra Kai consisted of new and old faces, so the show quite often referenced the movies to inform the larger narrative while also introducing original storylines. Johnny Lawrence, William Zabka, and his loss to Ralph Macchio's Daniel LaRusso in the 1984 movie haunted Cobra Kai throughout, but it was finally resolved near the end. Cobra Kai's big finale proved the show had been setting the stage for Johnny to redeem himself all along, with his loss to Daniel in the 1984 All-Valley tournament still hanging over him decades later. In this way, Cobra Kai was proving Johnny had always been the show's main character, despite the sometimes erratic focus on other characters within the franchise. However, such attention being paid to Johnny's redemption wouldn't have made much sense if it hadn't been for Daniel's underdog story in 1984, and Cobra Kai managed to admit something about that fight just before it ended. Cobra Kai Season 6 acknowledged Johnny was the better fighter in The Karate Kid. Johnny's monologue makes so much sense. Johnny and Miguel speaking in Cobra Kai. Ahead of Miguel's fight with Axel, Patrick Lewis, in Cobra Kai's penultimate episode, Zabka's character can be seen recounting the events of the 1984 All-Valley to his student and surrogate son, Miguel Diaz, Colo Marijuana. Johnny says during his speech to Miguel that he knows he was the better fighter when he first fought Daniel in a competitive setting. Johnny goes on to admit that a big reason for his loss was due to psychological factors. In other words, Daniel knew exactly what he was fighting for, and Johnny's motivations for winning were scattered. Daniel, in short, was standing up for himself and his new ideals. He'd been bullied by Johnny throughout The Karate Kid and wanted to prove he wasn't a pushover. On the other hand, Johnny just seemed to want to win for the sake of winning and to save himself the embarrassment of being defeated by someone he had thought was beneath him. While Johnny was battling to avoid shame, and presumably the harsh discipline of Martin Kove Sensei Kreese, Daniel was fighting for something that meant far more to him, which is why he came out on top. Daniel won, but he was nowhere near Johnny's level during The Karate Kid. Ralph Macchio's character was also a little lucky in his 1984 victory over Johnny. If things had gone even slightly differently at the end of The Karate Kid, Johnny would have easily won the All-Valley matchup. Daniel had barely dipped his toe into Miyagi-Do karate at that point, and had been training for a matter of weeks in preparation for the All-Valley. Inversely, Johnny was already a long-serving student of the Cobra Kai dojo. So, Johnny was understandably the favorite in 1984, which made it all the more surprising when he lost to a severely injured Daniel. Pat Morita's Mr. Miyagi essentially gave Daniel a crash course in what he needed to beat Johnny, and by extension, everyone else he needed to beat to get to the final. Daniel's rapid improvement over a short space of time certainly displayed a natural aptitude for martial arts, but it doesn't mean he was actually more technically proficient than Johnny in 1984. Instead, Daniel won by using Johnny's aggression against him, and also got a little bit lucky. Daniel eventually caught up with Johnny throughout the Karate Kid trilogy. Mr. Miyagi continued to train Daniel after his first All-Valley win. Cobra Kai was Zabka's proper return to the franchise, as Johnny barely featured in the original movie sequels. As such, it was tricky to tell how a rematch with Daniel would have gone during that era. Johnny was arguably always in front of Daniel in terms of progress within their respective forms of karate, but improvement can quickly plateau in disciplines like the martial arts. So, although Johnny doesn't arrive back on the scene until Cobra Kai, it's reasonable to assume that Daniel's continued training with Mr. Miyagi allowed him to catch up with Johnny. By the time of Cobra Kai's premiere, Daniel's progress hadn't been witnessed for decades, nor had Johnny's. However, it quickly became apparent that the two enemies, and eventual friends, had become equal in skill when it came to karate. Even when there was still animosity between them, there was a mutual respect that existed that proved Daniel and Johnny knew any rematches wouldn't be the same as the fight in 1984. Seeing this growth from the end of Karate Kid to the beginning of Cobra Kai is one of the franchise's most rewarding elements.